What's up, painters? Welcome back to Bellamar's Miniatures. Once again, we return to the old world, and this week that means an organ gun. Let's get painting. As always, I started with the grey Seer base coat from a rattle can and vampiric purple express colour through the airbrush. Then I thought I'd try the new army painter paints and see how it looks using them. I regret this later and changed my mind, but since I did it, we should add the time and include it in the total. I'm also reversing the colour scheme from my cannon. I do this just to add a bit of variety to the army. They still clearly belong to the same army, but it gives some character and individuality. The first colour was Imperial Navy from the Army Painter Fanatic range. Then it was Basilisk Red, also from the Army Painter Fanatic range. This covers very nicely for a red and I really like it. It's just a shame the colour doesn't match the red I'm using for my dwarves. I think I'll have to find a shop that is selling the singles in Australia and get the warm red set and see how that matches. Hopefully it'll cover as nicely as this red and match the colour of my current scheme closer. Luckily, the plate mail from the Fanatic range matches the old range well, so I use the Fanatic plate mail for all the medals. I probably should have mentioned it earlier, but I'm working on both parts of the organ gun at the same time, but I'm not doing the crew. When I painted the cannon, I felt like it would have been quicker to paint the crew either before or after doing the cannon, so I figured I'd give it a shot while doing the organ gun and just see how it goes. Then it was time for hammered copper from Vallejo. It's probably a pain to keep up with which paints are from what brand or range or anything like that, but I always put all the paints I've used in the description sorted by brand and range. So if there's a paint you want to try, check out the description and it'll be there for you. This is the last of the base coats for the cannon. That's it, just 4 colours. Nice, simple and easy. Once the base coats were done, I compared it to my cannon. This is where I decided the tones were way too different and I just wasn't happy with it. So I went back to my normal recipes. This meant grabbing Vampire Red and going over all the red. On the bright side, this was nice and quick since it had a nice base to go over, so it only took one quick coat. Then I did the same with Dark Sky. This one was a bit trickier since I had done the blue on the sides and fixing the blue up in there without messing up the gold. It took some careful brushwork, but I got it done in the end. Now, before putting the gun together, I wanted to make sure I could get the shadows established in the spots that'll be in shadows, but hard to reach later. I mostly focused this on the underpart and the gears on the body, then the lower side of the gun barrels. Once the model is together, I'll be doing more shading. This is just to get those spots that I won't be able to reach properly later. Then it gets glued together and we're on the home stretch. For the gun at least. It was back to the purple tone to establish the shadows properly. Now that it's together, I can better judge where those shadows should be. I don't do an all over wash with this, I'm only putting it where I want the shadows, as well as using it to help some things pop better like the runes and the idols on top of the cannon. Time to highlight. I start with Dragon Red. A lot of the reds will be shadowed by the gun barrels, so there won't be a lot of highlighting here. It's mostly just the support parts that are sticking out and the sides. Pure red is next to finish the red. I'm just using this to edge highlight and also hit the tip of the side supports that are sticking out beyond the gun barrels. There's even less to highlight for the blues. It's almost all in shadows. I only end up doing one layer of highlights using deep blue just to build some light highlights. This was mostly on the rims of the wheels and just the top edge of the front support. To highlight the metals, I break out Shining Silver. I'm mostly just highlighting along the top of the barrels and the parts on the back of the gun that face upwards, as well as the top of the wheels. I've established some nice shadows with the purple tone, so I don't want to go too crazy with the highlights. It'll be too much of a jump. Then to highlight the golds, it's Greedy Gold. I'm using the Greedy Gold from the Fanatic's range here, rather than the old one that I used to use. This is the same highlighting as the silver. The shadows are already pretty nicely established, so I'm just doing the final highlights with this. Things facing upward that would be catching the light, like the hammers on the back of the barrels and the runes and icons on top of the barrels. Also, make sure you get the handles on the sides. I decided the recessed runes weren't showing up as well as I wanted, so I did another pass with the purple tone to help them show up better. I used a very thin brush so I could just drop it into the runes without messing up any of the highlights that I'd already done around them. Time for the crew. While the Basilisk Red is the wrong tone for my dwarfs, it covers really well and gives a solid base for me to put my normal red recipe on top. So I decided I'd also use the Basilisk Red here first. Then I went over it with Vampire Red to establish the base colour for my reds. I've also decided to flip the colour scheme on my crew too. I think the variety gives some character to the army and it helps the army as a whole. Though if you wanted everyone to have the same colour scheme, I think that's fine too. This is definitely one of those areas that it's just down to your personal opinion. Next, it's time to block in the blues. Dark Sky makes it onto the palette for this. I have to be pretty careful here as the blue is all next to the red that's already done, so I just take my time and ensure I don't go over the red. Especially since the blue is so much darker, it can be a bit hard to fix any mistakes. Then the gloves, belts, boots, and that one guy's apron all get done with leather brown. For the flesh, I'm using Topaz flesh from the Fanatic range. I really liked this flesh colour when I used it on my D&D model. It's a nice ruddy skin colour that suits dwarfs really well. This did end up needing two coats to cover well, but I think that was because I thinned it down a bit much. I think normally this will cover nicely with one coat, but it's better to thin it down too much than not enough. Then it was time for the beards. As always, the beards are another spot that I get some variety into the army and units. So I did all three differently, and I picked a reddish brown beard, which I based with chaotic red, a white beard which I based with Uniform Grey, and a near black beard which I based with Necromancer Cloak. For the pages on the clipboard, I used Ancient Stone from the Fanatic range. It's a nice, very pale tannish colour that I'm really liking. I think it does great job for the paper here. Next, it's time for the medals. Once again, I break out plate mail and start blocking it all in. I've mentioned before, but I do the handles of the weapons and tools as metal. My headcanon for my army is that they're from a hold very high in the mountains, so wood is pretty rare for them. They'd rather use metal for most things and save the wood for more important things like war machines. The gyrocopters probably wouldn't get off the ground if they were made entirely of metal. When you're doing it, just make sure you get the tools on the front of the apron that one guy has. I almost missed them. For the hammered copper, there is very little on these models. It's all either in the beard or on the belt buckles. Make sure you double check the beard so you don't miss anything in them. Other than that, it's a pretty quick and easy step. Time to establish some shadows. The beards, skin and gold get hit with an all over wash, while the rest of the model I'm selective where I do it. For the selective shadows, it's mostly on the weapons and tools they're holding. Any parts facing downwards at minimum get a light shade. The larger parts that would cast more shadow get a heavier wash to make sure those shadows show nicely. I went too heavy with the wash on the skin and wasn't very happy with it, so I went back to the Topaz Skin to re-establish that mid-tone and tidy up the wash. I did still only do this on the skin facing upwards, leaving the shadows mostly untouched, unless it was too messy and needed to be touched up a bit. Then for highlighting the flesh, I started adding ice yellow to the skin tone and worked my way up, adding more ice yellow every layer. For each layer I'm working in smaller areas to build up the highlights and leave a nice gradient showing. Then it was back to the beards. For each beard it was a mix of the base colour and the final highlight colour. So that was Necromancer Cloak and Uniform Grey, Uniform Grey and White, and Chaotic Red and Fur Brown. I chose not to dry brush these beards as I feel like it'd be too messy. Instead, I use the side of my brush and run it along the beards to pick out the raised parts. For the most part, this will be enough for all the beards. There are a few spots you might want to give a bit of extra attention, like the mustaches, but you can probably get away with ignoring it if you feel like you don't have the brush control for it. Then, with the final highlight colours, I did the same things, just working in smaller areas to finish those highlights, still just using the side of the brush. Then I started highlighting the reds. I start with Dragon Red, picking out the spots that face upwards that the light would hit. If you're not sure, there are folds in most of their clothes. If you just pick them out and the tops of the shoulders, it'll look good. You can also stand it under a lamp and just see where the light hits. Then with pure red, I work in the same areas but make sure I'm leaving some dragon red showing just to give a smooth transition. Then it's the same process for the blues. I start with deep blue and pick out the shoulders and any other parts that are facing upwards. The guy with the alternating pattern has the most blue to highlight, there isn't a lot to do on the others. And I finish the blue with Ultramarine Blue. To highlight the leather, it's a 50-50 mix of leather brown and ice yellow. For the apron, I follow the folds and pick them out. They're pretty well defined and it makes it easy to highlight. The fingers are also really easy to do. You just run the side of your brush along them and it picks them out well. Other than that, it's just the parts of the gloves that are facing upwards and the tips of the boots. For highlighting the metal, it's Shining Silver. It's the same deal as the other colours. Pick out the spots that are facing upwards, and just do a nice layer to build up the highlights. As always, if you're unsure, stand it under a lamp and see where the light hits. Highlighting the gold is a nice and easy step. With a greedy gold, I picked out the raised parts on the belt buckles and the stuff in the beard. What are they called? They're not hairbands. Or maybe they are? I don't know. This is where I did the eyes. Normally I do the eyes before I do the skin highlights so I can tidy up any mistakes, but for whatever reason I skipped that and need to do them now. Luckily I managed to do them without making a mess. That's probably the first time ever. I wasn't totally happy with the red yet. I felt like it needed a bit more shading, so I grabbed the purple tone and very carefully brushed it into the recesses just to help build the shadows a bit more. After doing that, I was much happier with how the red looked. And we're done! Almost 2 hours quicker than the cannon too. I think doing the crew separately instead of alongside the warmachine made a big difference. As well as the fact I used Basilisk Red as a base for the reds, doing multiple coats to get a good red eats up a lot of time otherwise. I only have one unit left to paint from the Dwarf Battle Line box that I picked up to start my Dwarf army. But don't worry, I've gotten my hands on some other Dwarf models to build out my army, so there are still plenty more Dwarf videos to come. I also have a casual 1500 point tournament I'm playing in 2 weeks, so I found myself painting to a time limit again, but I'll get it done and it'll mean more videos for all of you. If you've made it this far, surely the video is worth giving a like. And if you want to see more of my dwarfs painted, go ahead and subscribe to keep up to date as I release more videos. Thanks for watching, catch you in the next video.